On a sweltering morning in mid-August 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna hunched beneath the shadow of a P-38 Lightning's left wing at Dabajura Airfield, deep in New Guinea's jungle. He watched his pilot getting ready for a mission that would likely be his last. The pilot's name was Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 23 years old. He'd flown 6 times into combat. He hadn't shot down a single enemy plane. Intelligence reports confirmed that 18 Mitsubishi fighters were heading their way to stop the morning patrol. Hayes was about to fly directly into that swarm. McKenna had spent 8 months keeping these P-38s in the air. He understood every bolt, cable, and rivet. Twin engines roaring with power, twin-tail booms stretching backward, incredible speed when flying straight, absolutely dominant at high altitude. But this beautiful killing machine had one terrible flaw that was murdering American boys every single day. It couldn't dance with a zero. The Japanese fighter was lighter, more nimble. It could complete a full flat turn in half the time required by the Lightning. In a dogfight, that difference meant the gap between living and dying. American pilots were taught never to turn with a zero, never try matching their agility. Use your speed. Use your height advantage. Drop in fast. Fire your guns. Climb back out. Hit them and vanish. Don't let them trap you in a turning battle. Hayes had followed that strategy 5 times already. It hadn't kept him alive. The Zeros were too clever. They tricked American pilots into turning, slipped inside their turning circle, locked onto their tails, and blew them apart. The 5th Air Force had watched 37 Lightnings go down in 6 weeks. Most were destroyed after getting caught in turning fights they couldn't win. McKenna had witnessed too many pilots perish. Good soldiers, really just kids. They climbed into their Lightnings feeling confident and returned in wooden boxes, or they never returned at all. The official training manual blamed pilot mistakes. The instructors claimed these pilots weren't following the rules, but McKenna understood the real problem. The problem wasn't the men flying these planes. It was the control cables. The P-38's aileron control cables snaked through the twin booms toward the tail, then ran forward through pulleys to reach the wing control surfaces. The cable system contained slack. Not a lot, maybe 3/8 of an inch when fully extended. But that tiny amount of slack created a pause between moving the stick and getting a response from the ailerons. At high speeds, this didn't matter much. But at low speeds during violent turning maneuvers, that fraction of a second delay separated rolling inside a Zero's turn from getting killed. McKenna had brought this up to the engineering officer 2 months back. The officer insisted the cable tension met specifications. Factory standards allowed for that slack. Modifying it would cancel the aircraft warranty. Besides, no field mechanic had permission to change flight control systems. That required engineering clearance from Lockheed, and Lockheed was 7,000 miles away in California. So McKenna did something that broke every rule in the Army Air Force Maintenance Handbook. He grabbed a piece of piano wire from a wrecked aircraft, cut it to 6 inches, bent it into a Z shape, and installed it as a tensioner on Lieutenant Hayes's left aileron control cable. The modification took 8 minutes. It added 4/10 of a pound of tension to the cable. It removed the slack completely. Nobody saw what he'd done. The inspection crew didn't measure cable tension that morning. They were busy checking engine oil levels and making sure ammunition was loaded properly. McKenna kept his mouth shut. He watched Hayes taxi toward the runway, watched him lift off, watched the Lightning disappear into the morning sky toward the Japanese fighters. What unfolded in the next 17 minutes would transform how every Lightning in the Pacific Theater operated. The first pilot McKenna lost to a Zero was Lieutenant David Chen. Early July 1943. Chen had been in the war zone for 3 weeks. McKenna had serviced his aircraft every single morning. They talked about California. Chen grew up in Sacramento. McKenna came from Long Beach. Both had worked on automobiles before the war started. Chen took off just after sunrise on a fighter patrol mission. He returned 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes punched through his left boom and a frightening story about a Zero that had gotten inside his turn. Chen explained he tried rolling out and diving away like the manual instructed, but the airplane felt sluggish to respond, like there was a gap between when he moved the stick and when the aircraft actually rolled. The Zero nearly got him. The only thing that saved his life was his wingman shooting the Zero off his tail. McKenna examined the bullet holes. They formed a tight cluster, perfect deflection shooting. The Zero pilot had led Chen perfectly, had predicted exactly where Chen's airplane would be. That shouldn't have been possible if Chen had rolled hard and dove immediately. unless the airplane had hesitated just long enough for the Zero to calculate the lead correctly. Chen didn't fly again. His aircraft went back to the depot for repairs. McKenna never saw him after that. 3 weeks later, he heard Chen had been killed flying a different Lightning over Rabaul. Same situation, caught in a turning fight, couldn't roll out quickly enough. The second pilot was Captain William Morrison. Morrison led flights, experienced pilot, 11 confirmed kills. He knew the Lightning inside and out, knew its weaknesses, flew intelligently. In early August, Morrison's flight caught 8 Zeros at 12,000 feet over Oro Bay. Morrison destroyed 1 Zero on his first attack run. He circled around for another pass. 2 Zeros reversed on him. McKenna heard the radio chatter afterward. Morrison tried rolling inverted and executing a split-S maneuver to escape. He reported that his controls felt mushy. The Zeros stayed glued to him through the maneuver and shot him down at 4,000 feet. Morrison's wingman said it looked like Morrison's airplane wasn't responding fast enough, like he was wrestling the controls. Morrison died in the crash. Morrison's crew chief was McKenna's friend, a guy named Rodriguez from Texas. Rodriguez was convinced something was wrong with Morrison's aircraft. He checked everything after they pulled the wreckage out. Engine settings, control surface alignment, cable tensions, everything met specifications. Nothing mechanically wrong with the airplane. The official report labeled it pilot error. Rodriguez didn't buy it, neither did McKenna. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. He knew some well. Most he'd only met briefly during pre-flight inspections. But he'd worked on all their aircraft, had signed their maintenance paperwork, had watched them taxi out and take off. Some returned, some didn't. The ones who returned told identical stories. The Lightning felt slow to respond during hard maneuvering, like there was a slight lag between moving the controls and getting the aircraft to react. Most pilots assumed that was just how the airplane handled. Heavy fighter, large control surfaces, some delay should be expected. But McKenna knew that wasn't normal. He'd felt that delay with his own hands when he worked on the control cables, that tiny bit of slack in the system. He started listening carefully to the sound the cables made when he adjusted them during maintenance. There was a specific tone, a kind of low vibration when you plucked them. Loose cables sounded different than tight cables. McKenna could hear the difference. Every Lightning on the flight line had cables that sounded slightly loose, within specifications, but loose. He mentioned this to Rodriguez one evening after Morrison died. Rodriguez asked what could be done about it. McKenna said nothing officially, but unofficially there was a fix. It just required breaking regulations that could get them both court-martialed. The problem wasn't that American pilots didn't understand what to do. They understood perfectly. Every briefing hammered it home. Every training flight drilled it into them. Never turn with a Zero. Use speed. Use altitude. Hit and run. The strategy was crystal clear. The problem was that combat didn't follow strategy. Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been in New Guinea for 2 months. 23 years old, farm kid from Iowa. He'd flown 6 combat missions and scored 0 kills, not because he was a poor pilot, because he followed the rules. And the rules kept placing him in situations where he couldn't get a shot. On his 3rd mission, Hayes dropped on a Zero from altitude, accelerated to 400 miles per hour, came in from the sun like the manual instructed. Got the Zero in his gun sight, started pulling lead for deflection. The Zero snap-rolled left and dropped. Hayes tried following. His Lightning rolled into the turn but felt like it was pushing through thick mud. By the time his aircraft pointed where he wanted it, the Zero had vanished. Hayes pulled out and climbed back to altitude. No shots fired. The 4th mission was worse. Hayes and his wingman jumped 2 Zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes got the first burst off and missed. The Zero reversed hard right. Hayes rolled to follow. His wingman shouted that 2 more Zeros were coming in from above. Hayes tried rolling back level and diving away. The airplane responded, but slowly. Just slowly enough that one of the diving Zeros got a 3-second burst into Hayes's right boom. 20mm cannon shells. They didn't penetrate, but they scared Hayes badly enough that he broke off the fight and ran for home with his engines trailing smoke. 5th mission, Hayes watched his wingman die. The wingman's name was Lieutenant Thomas Parker, 21 years old, from Boston. They'd gone through training together. In mid-August, Parker got separated from the formation during a dogfight over Finchhafen. 2 Zeros locked onto his tail. Parker tried everything. Rolled hard, reversed, tried to scissor. The Zeros stayed with him through every move. Hayes heard Parker on the radio calling for help, heard the panic in his voice, heard him say his airplane wasn't turning fast enough, heard the gunfire, heard Parker scream. Then silence. Hayes didn't sleep that night. Neither did most of the squadron. Parker's bed remained empty. His personal belongings got boxed up and shipped home. His Lightning was written off as a combat loss. The maintenance log noted no mechanical problems. The official cause was pilot error during defensive maneuvering. McKenna had worked on Parker's aircraft the morning he died. Everything was perfect. Engine timing, control surface alignment, cable tension within specifications. The airplane was fine, but Parker was dead anyway. And McKenna knew exactly why. That fraction of a second delay in the controls, that tiny bit of slack that the manual said was acceptable. It had killed Parker just like it had killed Morrison and Chen and 14 others. The worst part was the smell. Every morning McKenna worked in the maintenance area. The smell of aviation fuel and hot metal and hydraulic fluid filled his lungs. It was the smell of aircraft preparing for combat. Some of those aircraft would return. Some wouldn't. And McKenna would be there the next morning breathing the same smells, working on more aircraft, watching more pilots walk out to machines that couldn't respond fast enough to keep them alive. On the evening of August 16th, Hayes came to the maintenance area and found McKenna working on his assigned Lightning. Hayes asked if there was anything McKenna could do to make the airplane roll faster. Anything at all. Hayes said he didn't care whether it was regulation or not. He just wanted a fighting chance. McKenna looked at Hayes, saw the fear, saw the desperation, saw a kid who knew he was going to die if something didn't change. McKenna told Hayes to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. McKenna worked alone that night. The maintenance hangar was quiet after 2,300 hours. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of generators and the buzz of insects against the overhead lights. The air smelled like engine oil and tropical humidity. He pulled the inspection panel off Hayes's Lightning's left boom. The metal was still warm from the day's sun. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys toward the tail section. McKenna grabbed the cable with both hands and pulled, felt the slack, maybe 3/8 of an inch of play before the tension caught. His hands were covered in grease and his fingers ached from a full day of maintenance work. But he could feel that slack clearly. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. The piano wire came from a salvaged Lightning that had ground-looped 2 weeks earlier. The aircraft was scrap, but McKenna had pulled useful parts before it went to the depot, including a 6-inch piece of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He'd kept it in his tool bag without really knowing why. Now he understood. He sat on the hangar floor with the wire and a pair of pliers, bending it into a Z shape. The wire was stiff, fought back against the pliers. His hand slipped twice, cut his thumb on the second try. The blood made the wire slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. Took him 8 minutes to get the bend right. The Z shape would act as an inline tensioner, would add just enough preload to the cable to eliminate the slack. Installing it was harder. The space inside the boom was tight. McKenna had to work with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. The beam kept shifting. Shadows jumped across the cable system. His shoulder wedged against the boom structure. The metal edge dug into his arm. He could feel sweat running down his back despite the night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction. His fingers fumbled with the clevis pin, dropped it, heard it bounce somewhere in the boom, spent 5 minutes feeling around in the dark until he found it. The whole time his heart was pounding. If the engineering officer discovered him doing unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he'd face a court-martial, possibly a dishonorable discharge, maybe prison time. But Hayes was going to die if McKenna didn't do something. He inserted the piano wire tensioner between the cable end and the pulley, then reconnected the cable. The fit was tight. He had to force the clevis pin through. When it finally seated, he tested the tension by hand, pulled on the cable. No slack. The control surface moved immediately. Perfect. McKenna replaced the inspection panel, cleaned up his tools, wiped the blood off the wire and his hands, and walked out of the hangar at 1:15 in the morning. The tropical night was humid and still. Somewhere in the distance, he heard aircraft engines, Japanese night raiders probably. The sound made his stomach clench. He'd just modified a flight control system without authorization, used a non-standard part, violated at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed during flight, Hayes would crash and McKenna would be responsible. But if it worked, Hayes might survive. McKenna went to his bunk but didn't sleep. He watched the ceiling until dawn. At 6:30, he walked to the flight line, watched the crew fuel and arm Hayes's aircraft, watched Hayes walk out for his pre-flight briefing, watched him climb into the cockpit. At 42 minutes past 7, Hayes took off. McKenna stood on the flight line and watched the Lightning climb into the morning sky. Watched it join formation with 16 other aircraft. Watched them head northwest toward Japanese airspace. And then all he could do was wait. The fight started at 14 minutes past 8. Hayes's flight of 4 Lightnings intercepted 9 Zeros at 13,000 feet over the Huon Gulf. The morning sun was behind them, perfect setup for a diving attack. Hayes was flying number 3 position. His element leader called out the bounce. They rolled in. Hayes picked a 0 at the back of the formation, dove from altitude, built speed to 380 miles per hour. The 0 grew larger in his gun sight. Hayes could see the painted rising sun on the fuselage, could see the pilot's head in the canopy. He pressed the trigger. The 450 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon hammered. Tracers reached out, most missed. A few hits sparked off the 0's wing, not enough. The 0 snap-rolled right and dove. Hayes rolled to follow. That's when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No delay, no lag. The stick moved and the aircraft rolled immediately. Hayes had never felt his Lightning move like that. It was like the airplane had been waiting for his command and executed it the moment he gave it. He rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the normal time, got his nose down. The 0 was right there in his sight picture. He fired again, 3-second burst. The rounds walked up the 0's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The 0's engine exploded. Pieces flew off. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell toward the jungle below, trailing black smoke. Hayes's first kill, but there was no time to celebrate. His wingman called out 0s diving from above. Hayes looked up, saw 3 of them coming down in a shallow dive, coming fast. They'd seen him shoot down their friend. Now they wanted revenge. Hayes shoved the throttles forward and started to climb, but the 0s were faster in the dive. They'd be on him in seconds. His only option was to reverse and fight. Every instinct screamed at him to keep climbing, keep running. That was the doctrine, but doctrine meant dying today. He rolled hard left and pulled. The Lightning snapped around like nothing he'd ever experienced. The nose came through the horizon. He saw the lead 0. It was turning to follow him, but hadn't expected Hayes to reverse that fast. The 0 was in a bad position. Exposed. Hayes pulled lead, fired, and hit the 0 in the left wing root. The wing folded. The 0 tumbled. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The other 2 0s tried to scissor with him, alternating turns to force an overshoot. Hayes stayed with them. Every time they reversed direction, his Lightning snapped into the turn instantly. No delay, no fighting the controls. The airplane did exactly what he wanted the moment he wanted it. It was like flying a different aircraft, like someone had removed invisible weights from the control system. 1 0 made a mistake, reversed too hard, bled too much speed. Hayes got inside his turn. Close range, maybe 200 feet. He fired, couldn't miss. The 0 came apart. Pieces of aircraft fell past Hayes's canopy. He felt the Lightning shudder as debris hit his right boom. 3 kills. The 4th 0 ran. Hayes didn't chase. He was low on fuel and ammunition. He climbed back to altitude, reformed with what was left of his flight. They headed home. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. When Hayes landed at Dabajura at 3 minutes past 9, McKenna was waiting on the flight line. Hayes shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He walked straight to McKenna. Hayes said 2 words, "It worked." What neither of them realized was that 6 other pilots had watched Hayes's engagement from altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell saw the entire fight from 15,000 feet. Mitchell was a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group. He'd been watching Hayes's element engage the 0s below when he noticed something unusual. Hayes's Lightning was rolling faster than any Lightning Mitchell had ever seen. The aircraft snapped through maneuvers like it weighed half what it should. Mitchell knew every pilot in the theater, knew their skill levels. Hayes was good, but not that good. Something was different about his airplane. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in the debriefing room. Hayes was still pumped full of adrenaline, hands shaking as he filled out the combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked him what was different. Hayes said he didn't know. His airplane just responded better today, faster. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything to the aircraft. Hayes said he should talk to Technical Sergeant McKenna. Mitchell found McKenna in the maintenance area 2 hours later. McKenna was working on a different Lightning. His hands were black with grease. His coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked him directly, "What did you do to Hayes's airplane?" McKenna looked at him for a long moment. Then he told him everything. The piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized change to the flight control system. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When McKenna finished, Mitchell asked if he could do the same modification to Mitchell's aircraft. McKenna said yes, but Mitchell had to understand the risks. The modification wasn't approved, wasn't tested. If something went wrong, both of them would face charges. Mitchell said he didn't care. He'd lost 4 pilots in his flight in the past month, all caught in turning fights they couldn't escape. If there was something that could help them survive, he wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening, McKenna modified Mitchell's Lightning. Same piano, wire tensioner, same installation method. Mitchell flew it the next morning and came back raving about the improvement. The airplane rolled like a fighter instead of a truck, he told his wingman. The wingman told McKenna he wanted the modification too. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft. Word spread through the squadron. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some crew chiefs refused, said it was against regulations. Others were willing to try. McKenna showed them how. Cut the piano wire, bend it into a Z shape, install it as an inline tensioner. Takes 8 minutes, changes everything. The modification spread pilot to pilot and mechanic to mechanic. No official documentation, no engineering approval, just whispered conversations in the ready room and maintenance area. Hayes shot down 2 more zeros on August 22nd using the modified controls. Mitchell got 3 on August 25th. Other pilots started coming back from missions with kills. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Lieutenant James Watkins was a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group stationed at Gusap. He heard about the modification from a pilot who transferred from Dabajura. Watkins was skeptical, but he tried it on 1 aircraft. The pilot came back from the next mission with his first kill after 8 weeks of combat. Watkins modified 4 more aircraft. Other crew chiefs in the 49th started doing it too. By early September, maybe 40 Lightnings in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at Dabajura noticed something was different but couldn't figure out what. Control cable tensions checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew, the mechanics knew, nobody told the officers. The kill ratio started shifting. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 Lightnings for every 0 destroyed. In August, it was 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed, but officially nobody knew what. Then the Japanese noticed. Japanese fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Flight reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that American Lightnings were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, revering direction more quickly. The reports noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's top aces. 64 confirmed kills. He'd been fighting American pilots since Pearl Harbor. On September 3, 1943, Sakai engaged a Lightning over Wewak. He used his standard tactic, drew the American into a turning fight, waited for the Lightning to begin its roll, then snapped his turn back the opposite direction to get inside the American's turning radius. Except the Lightning reversed with him. Sakai had executed this maneuver dozens of times. He knew exactly how long it took a Lightning to roll, knew the timing perfectly, but this Lightning rolled faster than it should have. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American got guns on him. Sakai had to dive away. He returned to base confused and frustrated. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans weren't flying differently. They were still using the same tactics, but their aircraft were responding faster. Fractionally, but enough to matter. Enough to disrupt the timing that Japanese pilots had learned to exploit. Japanese intelligence tried to determine what had changed. They examined wreckage from downed Lightnings, found no obvious modifications. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they'd been fighting for months. The engines were the same. The armament was the same. Nothing visible had changed. What the Japanese didn't know was that the change was hidden inside the boom, a 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like original equipment. Even if they'd found it, they might not have understood its purpose. It wasn't a new weapon system, wasn't a new engine, just a minor modification to control cable tension. But that minor modification was killing their pilots. By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing aircraft to Lightnings at rates they hadn't seen since early in the war. The psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, Zero pilots had owned the sky in turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. That confidence was breaking down. Pilots who used to press attacks were becoming cautious, hesitant. They weren't sure anymore if their tactics would work. The Japanese tried to adapt. Some pilots stopped trying to get into turning fights with lightnings, used hit-and-run tactics instead. But that meant giving up their main advantage. The Zero's strength was maneuverability. Fighting like a lightning meant fighting on American terms, and the lightning was faster, more heavily armed, and could take more damage. Other pilots tried to compensate by being more aggressive, closing to shorter range before firing, taking more risks. But aggression without the ability to outturn the enemy just meant dying faster. Several experienced Japanese pilots were killed in September trying tactics that had worked perfectly in July. The fundamental problem for Japanese pilots was that they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. They knew something had changed, but they didn't know what, and they couldn't figure out how to counter it. You can't develop tactics against a modification you don't know exists. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in combat with Lightnings. American losses in the same period were 22 aircraft. The ratio had reversed. For the first time in the Pacific War, Lightnings were killing Zeros at better than a 1-to-1 rate. Japanese command ordered pilots to avoid engaging Lightnings unless they had significant numerical advantage. That order marked a turning point. The Zero had gone from hunter to hunted, and it all came down to a piece of piano wire that nobody was supposed to install. The modification never became official during the war. The Army Air Force Engineering Command learned about it in October 1943 when a maintenance inspector at Dabajura noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. He traced the discrepancies to the piano wire tensioners, wrote a report, and sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification violated regulations, but it was working. Fighter squadrons using the modification had measurably better kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. The question wasn't whether the modification helped. The question was whether to punish the mechanics who'd installed it without authorization or quietly approve it after the fact. In November, Lockheed sent an engineering team to New Guinea to evaluate the modification. They tested it, measured the cable tension, calculated the stress loads, ran flight tests. Their conclusion was that the modification was safe and effective. It should have been part of the original design. Lockheed integrated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J model that entered production in December 1943. But McKenna never received official credit. No commendation, no medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation attributed the control system improvement to engineering analysis. McKenna's name didn't appear anywhere. Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, returned to Iowa in 1945, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 children, and worked as a crop duster for 37 years. He never forgot what McKenna had done. Every year on August 17th, Hayes called McKenna to thank him for saving his life. Mitchell also survived. He became a squadron commander, led his unit through the Philippines campaign, and shot down 16 aircraft. After the war, he stayed in the Air Force and retired as a colonel in 1963. He told the story of McKenna's modification to every young maintenance officer he supervised, made sure they understood that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who see problems the engineers miss. McKenna stayed in the Army Air Force until 1946, returned to California, and went back to working on cars. He opened his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He worked on engines for 42 years. Never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a mechanic, fixed airplanes, that's all. In 1991, a military historian researching Lightning modifications found references to the piano wire tensioner in maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian tracked down McKenna through veteran registries. McKenna was 73 years old by then, still working part-time in his garage. The historian asked him about the modification. McKenna confirmed the story, said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The historian estimated that the modification may have saved between 80 and 100 American pilots' lives based on survival rate improvements in squadrons that used it. McKenna said he never counted, he just remembered the pilots who came back. Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, the others, that was enough. James McKenna died in 2006 at age 88. He was buried in Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic. It did not mention the piano wire tensioner. Did not mention that he'd changed how American fighters flew. Did not mention that he'd broken regulations to save lives. His garage in Long Beach is still there, different owner now. But on the wall in the back office, there's a faded photograph. A young mechanic in coveralls standing next to a P-38 Lightning. The date written on the back is August 1943, New Guinea. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through official channels or engineering committees. Through sergeants and mechanics who see problems, find solutions, and don't wait for permission to save lives. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.